Hey everyone! So we are finally doing part 4 of the Psalm 139 series. You're gonna have to forgive me. The tripod I'm using is new and I haven't quite figured it out. It's a little not right for this, so if it starts to droop, I'm gonna be paying attention to it, but I apologize. I know it's kind of a weird setup right now, so I'm still working on trying to get that down. If you guys have any recommendations for some good like overhead tripods, let me know, because I cannot find anything that works with my phone. If you didn't know, I record with my phone. So yeah, here we go though. This is the last set in this series, so if you missed the first few, I'll link them down below. Definitely watch those first, otherwise this won't make as much sense. And yeah, let's just hop right into this. So today we are going to finish it up in Psalm 139 with verses 17 through 24. So we have the last chunk of this here to do, and I'm just going to go ahead and read through this once, and then I encourage you to pause the video as usual and read through this in a couple different versions. This is the Christian Standard Bible version that I'm reading from here, but I really encourage you to read in the New King James Version, the English Standard, the New International, and whatever versions you like reading in, because it really gives you a better understanding of the text when you read it in multiple kind of dialects with different themes and ideas focused. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with verse 17. God, how precious are your thoughts excuse me. God, how precious your thoughts are to me, how vast their sum is. If I counted them, they would outnumber the grains of sand. When I wake up, I am still with you. God, if only you would kill the wicked. You bloodthirsty men, stay away from me, who invoke you deceitfully. Your enemies swear by you falsely. Lord, don't I hate those who hate you and detest those who rebel against you? I hate them with extreme hatred. I consider them my enemies. Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my concerns. See if there's any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting, in the everlasting way. Getting ahead of myself there. All right, so this is the very last part of David's psalm to the Lord, and I've talked about this in earlier videos, but remember that David probably wrote this psalm amidst a battle. So when you read about him, you know, talking about the wicked and enemies and those who rebel against you, that's because David was currently in a war fighting life or death for God against men who didn't believe in God, or men who worshipped different gods instead of the one true God. And so keep that in the back of your mind as we kind of dig into this, because understanding that context really will help you understand kind of where David is coming from and why he prays and talks to God kind of in this manner. All right, so let's start from verse 17, and I'm going to go ahead and just start to break this down. This PDF version of this will be downloadable, so I'll leave a link down in the description box. Excuse me for my spelling. I am an average speller, so if you see little mistakes here or there, that's why. And I didn't spell check myself before posting this online. So, number 17. God, how precious your thoughts are to me, how vast their sum is. God thinks about us, and does good for us often and consistently. And knowing that and remembering that is so important. David recognizes this, and out of that we get a sense of his awe and his wonder for God's omnipresence and for God's good nature. So we talked about the characteristics of God in the first video. The first one is that God knows everything. The second is that God knows everything because he's everywhere. He's omnipresent. He's everywhere at all times. And the third is that God cares about you and is invested in you. And we see all three of these characteristics summed up right here. God, how precious your thoughts are to me, how vast their sum is. If I counted them, they would outnumber the grains of sand, and when I wake up, I am still with you. God knows everything, so his thoughts are just precious and overwhelming. He literally knows everything there is to know about us, and because he's everywhere and he's omnipresent, the sum of him and the sum of his thoughts are incomprehensible to us. So really what I want to get out of this verse is that God is awesome. And I use this word carefully. We use the word awesome a lot in today's world. You know, like, oh, dude, that's an awesome video, or, oh, that's awesome, congrats. But you have to look at what this word actually means. Awesome. It's awe-inspiring. And when you really think of it as that kind of context, it's very easy to see how God is awesome. I mean, he is just so good and so for us that it really is incomprehensible. And we just start to get a tiny little glimpse of that in this psalm. So this verse kind of starts off with a praise. Okay, then verse 17 and 18 together is, if I counted them, they were outnumber the grains of sand, and when I wake up, I'm still with you. So this outnumbering grains of sand is referring to God's thoughts. And thoughts can have a couple different meanings. That can mean his love for us. It can mean, you know, his actual thoughts, what he thinks about humanity, what he thinks in a moment, you know, what he is processing. And it can also just mean like his ideas, his kind of creator mindset. All of those things just outnumber the grains of sand. And this is a expression that is used a lot throughout the Bible. Outnumber the stars, outnumber the sand, because humans can't even begin to comprehend the idea of infinity. And it's in the same way that we can't comprehend the sum of God's good works for us. David compares counting the grains of sand, which is a reference to Genesis 22:17, which is God's covenant with Abraham. So I'm just going to make a note of that here. So if you'd like, you can pause the video and go read that and just see they use the same kind of wording, the same kind of context in this. And we're going to stick with our highlighting here. Use orange for that. Whoa, throw my pen. Okay, and then let's go ahead and go into verse 19. God, if only you would kill the wicked, you bloodthirsty men, stay away from me. So this passage is kind of a lament. If you don't know what lament means, pause the video, go look up the definition. Laments are throughout the entire Bible, and especially in the Psalm. It's essentially a complaint to God, but it's kind of more than that. And depending on what version you read and what passage you're reading, they all have a little bit of a different context. So I want to write lament here, because these next few verses are all laments. And that'll continue on to the next page. Okay, so David is directing his anger and frustration to the only one who can truly handle his frustration and his anger. And I want to touch on that because this whole study here was kind of inspired by a sermon that our church did, and I will link to it down below. It was an entire series on Psalm 139 and about David and everything, and it really touched on anger and how we direct our anger and who we direct our anger towards. And this is such an important passage to pull from here, because a lot of times when we're angry or when we are frustrated by something, we let our anger out on the people that we love. We let them, you know, we get mad at our husbands, our spouses, our kids, our family, our parents, whoever, even if it's not their fault. And that is so important to read and hear, because we see David in the middle of a battle where he is just hurt. He's watching people he knows die for him and for God, and he is just overwhelmed. And so he turns that overwhelm over to God. He just kind of gives it at his feet, and he says, like, here, do what you will with this. And that is such a healthy and perfect way to handle your laments, your, you know, struggles, your anger. And so it's really important to see that he lays down his frustration at the only one who can actually handle it. Because when you're in the trenches of war, when you're in the trenches of life, your anger needs to be intentionally directed. And God invites us to lay all of that at his feet. He invites the mess into his kingdom, and he invites us to come with all of our baggage and bring it to him rather than trying to leave our baggage at the door. Okay, and then kind of in that same breath, we'll go into 20 and 21. God, if only you would kill the wicked. You bloodthirsty men, stay away from me, who invoke you deceitfully. Your enemies swear by you falsely. Lord, don't I hate those who hate you, and detest those who rebel against you? David confesses his hatred towards the enemy that he's currently fighting, and he asks God to literally slay them, to kill them. David is a man of God, and he knows that the wars he is fighting has purpose. He knows that the war that he is currently in is a war for faith, is a war for God. And so, again, this sounds like so dark and so evil and like so wrong. But when you look at the context of what's going on during this time when David wrote this psalm, it all makes sense, and it really shows how David isn't afraid to ask God for these things. He's not afraid to ask for victory in battle. He's not afraid to admit his hatred for the men that he's fighting, and he's not afraid to admit that to God because he knows that God can handle it. Okay, and then I also want to just make a quick note here. Kind of as verse 22 and throughout this. He says, I hate them with extreme hatred. I consider them my enemies. God doesn't expect us to come to him with clean hands and no baggage. He wants us to invite him into our mess, into our lives. And he wants us to pursue him before we're ever, fixed. He knows us and he cares for us exactly as we are now, with all of our addictions, with all of our sin, with our shame, with our past, exactly as it is. And so he sent his son to die for us while we were still a work in progress. And that's so important to remember, in your day-to-day life, that God doesn't expect you to fix yourself before stepping into his kingdom or before praying for him, or before joining a Bible study group, or before joining a church. The church is not going to collapse because you walk through the doors. God literally already knows everything about you, all of the sin, all of the shame that you carry. And so it is so important as you read through these Psalms and as you look at the men who wrote these Psalms to know that they're just like us. David was not perfect. David was literally a commander in a war, commanding and putting men on their deathbeds. And yet he writes this beautiful psalm that we've been studying for the last 4 weeks. And so I just want to encourage you guys that wherever you are in your life right now, whether this is like your one time that you actually spend time with God is watching YouTube videos like this, or whether you are a devout Christian that spends more time at church than you do at home, it doesn't matter. Either way, God welcomes you, and either way, there's a place for you in his kingdom. And anyone who tells you differently is not getting that from God. And I just want to really hammer that in to your mind, because I can't tell you how many people turn away from the church or turn away from faith because they've been told that they're not there yet, or that they have to fix themselves before they are welcome, because that is not true, you guys. And you can see that right here in this psalm. So let's just make a little note here. Keep writing mess with an N. What's going on? there's something sticky on my table here. Sorry, you guys. All right, so last 2 verses here. Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my concerns. See if there's any offensive way in me, and lead me in the everlasting way. So verse 23. David has a sincere desire to know God. He says, search me, God, and know my heart. And to have a real intimate relationship with God, he just surrenders to God completely. And instead of serving himself, he just says, like, God, search me and know me. Like, get to know my heart, test me, know what I worry about, know my anxieties, see if there's any offensive way in me, and lead me to the right path. Asking God to know us and discerning our thoughts might seem kind of silly since God already knows us and he already knows everything there possibly is to know about us. But think of this from a parent-child perspective. Your son or daughter might be struggling with something. And as you see them struggling, you are just kind of, extra patient with them. You might offer to help them. And your child can respond with anger. They can lash out at you. They can completely ignore you. Or they can sit down and just express those emotions to you. They can ask you for help. If your kid is struggling in math or something, you can say like, hey, if you need help with your homework, let me know. You might, help them with their answers or support them. But there's a huge difference between you being there for them and them asking you for help. And God does the same thing with us. God will do good for us even when we resist. But opening up and inviting him to change our hearts allows us to be more like him. So let's make some notes here. I'm going to ask you some challenge questions. All right, you guys. Psalm 139 has quickly become one of my favorite psalms, and it's one that I frequently read and pray over, and when I'm feeling angry, lonely, unwelcomed, when I just need to be humbled, or when I need to feel known, this is the psalm I turn to. And part of that is because it's such a beautiful reminder that we are known, that God literally knows everything there is to know about us, the good, the bad, all of it. But it's also such a great reminder that I'm not the only one to feel this way. There's people feeling this way today, and there were people feeling this way during the time of the Bible. David felt this way. That's why he wrote the psalm. That's the whole point. And there's something comforting in knowing that this is not an unnatural or an unhealthy feeling, that this is something that is part of our human nature to question and to feel alone and to not quite feel right about things. But that we can turn to God in those emotions, and that we can put all of our anger, all of our baggage, all of our hatred towards him and trust him with it is so refreshing. And it's such a good reminder of how good our God is. So I'm going to go ahead and add the highlights here, and then we will wrap this up. All right, you guys, that is it for the Psalm 139 study. As I said, you can download this entire PDF with all of my notes and everything down below. I encourage you to take your own notes, of course, but you can use these as reference throughout. And I will also list all of the different supplies that I used for this, and all of the resources that I used to get this kind of commentary and all of these notes down below in the description box. But if you have any questions about this, let me know. I've said this before, I am not an expert. I'm not even close to an expert. Most of this is coming from my own studies from my church and from commentaries online that I kind of combine and decipher and put together. So I have no training in this at all, but I'll answer questions when I can. And I also want to invite you that if I've ever said something wrong, if I misquote something, if I, say something that you're like, oh, I don't know if that's quite right, please call me out on it. Do it respectfully, but I do make mistakes and I am wrong at times, especially when doing in-depth studies like this. So don't be afraid to, ask questions and maybe call me out if you notice something a little off. And I'm always happy to, answer those in the comments and have a discussion. So that is it, you guys. Thank you so much for your patience with me on this. I will see you guys in the next video.